They say some betrayals are loud, violent, obvious, and explosive. Mine came in whispers, in lingering silences at dinner tables, in smiles that didn't reach the eyes. It came in the form of a cupcake on my 50th birthday. But before that moment, before the humiliation, before the unraveling, there was what everyone believed was a perfect life. I was Isabella Moreau, wife of Gregory Moreau, a name that echoed in real estate circles across Seattle like a gold-plated promise. People envied us. They envied the lakefront mansion with its glass walls, the art pieces handpicked from Europe, the winter holidays. In Aspen, the dinners under chandeliers that cost more than some homes. They envied our daughter, Savannah, a sweet, intelligent girl on the path to becoming everything a mother could hope for. But envy is a funny thing. It never sees the cracks, and our cracks were hidden in plain sight. I had once been a fierce litigator, a rising star at one of San Francisco's most competitive law firms. That life was shelved the moment Gregory asked me to consider staying home after Savannah was born. I said yes, not because I was weak, but because I believed in building something greater, a family, a legacy. I believed in us. I believed wrong. The first time I suspected something was off, it was over something so small, Gregory forgetting our anniversary. A man who had remembered the date for 15 years suddenly shrugged and said he'd been slammed with investors. The second time, he changed his phone password. The third time, Savannah, my sunshine, snapped at me for asking why her tuition refund hadn't been deposited. But it wasn't the details. It was the energy. It was walking into a room and feeling like my presence annoyed them, like I was a ghost haunting their lives. One night, I walked into Gregory's study while he was away and saw something that didn't belong. A wine glass with lipstick, not mine. It wasn't red like I wear. It was coral, young. I cleaned it, quietly. I didn't ask. Not then, because somewhere in me I was still hoping it was nothing, that I was imagining things, that maybe menopause was making me paranoid. Denial is a survival instinct, and I was a master of it. But the truth has a smell. It lingers. It stains the air. It came to a head one Tuesday morning. Gregory had flown out for a conference in Chicago. I called the hotel he supposedly stayed in to have flowers delivered. The front desk said he'd never checked in. That night, he returned home, kissed my cheek, and told me Chicago was colder than he remembered. He hadn't packed a jacket. I lay in bed beside him, awake until dawn, staring at a ceiling I no longer recognized. I looked at this man, this stranger, who shared my bed, and realized that love, once so loud, had been reduced to background noise, but I wasn't ready to explode. Not yet. I began to observe. Savannah, once clingy and open, now kept her phone face down and whispered into it when she thought I wasn't listening. She used to ask me for advice. Now she only asked for money. I chalked it up to growing pains. But deep down, I felt something colder. One day, I asked if she wanted to go shopping. Our thing. She hesitated, looked at her phone, and said, "I'll let you know." She never did. So I started writing everything down. Not in emails, not on a computer, in a leather-bound journal. Because part of me knew that I was no longer a part of their world. I was being slowly erased, and I hadn't even begun to understand how far they were willing to go. Everything changed the week before my birthday. Gregory insisted on throwing me a grand party at a vineyard in Napa Valley. "Just close friends," he said. "Let me do something nice for you." I wanted to say no, but I was starving for kindness, and I was tired of being suspicious. The guest list was curated. Mostly his business partners, a few of Savannah's college friends. Not mine. No one from my side of the family. I tried to brush it off. "You're going to love this," he told me as we walked into the garden that night. Twinkling lights, soft jazz, a breeze that smelled like ripe grapes. Everyone clapped when I arrived, but something felt off. Their smiles were too tight. And then came the gift. Savannah walked out carrying a single cupcake on a plate. It was crushed slightly on one side, the frosting messy like it had been handled by a child. On top, in crooked icing, it read, "Happy 50th, still hanging in there. Laughter from the crowd, from Gregory." Not from me. I stood there, frozen, while Savannah said into the mic, "Mom always taught me to never settle. But look at her, 50 and still trying." The crowd laughed again. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't the cupcake. It was the betrayal in her eyes, the deliberate cruelty. And then I saw it. Gregory holding his phone, recording me. I caught a glimpse of the screen. He had already named the video, "The Queen Turns 50. The humiliation was choreographed. And that's when I knew. This wasn't thoughtlessness. This was war. But what they didn't know was that I don't lose wars. Not quietly, not anymore. If you've ever trusted the wrong people, if you've ever been gaslit into doubting your own reality, if you've ever felt the ground beneath, you crack while everyone around you claps, stay with me. Because this story doesn't end in tears, it ends in fire. And now, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel. It's your way of saying, more stories like this, please. It helps us create more powerful content that shines light on the darkness so many live through in silence. Now, here's a question for you. Our little secret test. If you found out your spouse and your child were hiding a secret that could ruin your life, would you? A. Confront them immediately. Gather evidence and disappear without a word. Comment your answer below, A or B, and tell us why. Your voice matters. Stay tuned. What comes next will shock you. There's something eerie about standing in a room full of people and realizing you're completely alone. Not physically. There were at least 40 guests at that vineyard party. But emotionally, spiritually, profoundly alone in a way I had never felt in my life. My 50th birthday was supposed to be a celebration of life, love, and the family I had built with everything I had. My time, my ambition, my youth. But it became the moment I realized none of it had ever really been mine. It had all been borrowed, conditional, fragile, and disposable. And that night, everything shattered. Gregory was in his element. He looked like the perfect host, confident, charismatic, walking from group to group with his expensive smile and effortless charm. He wore the tailored navy blue blazer I bought him for our last anniversary, the one he'd claimed he forgot. Now I watched him wear it like a costume for an audience he cared about more than he ever cared for me. Savannah was glued to her phone for most of the night, occasionally glancing up with that glazed-over expression I'd come to recognize, her get-this-over-with look. When her friends arrived, girls I barely knew, some I'd never met, she lit up. Her energy shifted completely. She laughed, hugged, posed for selfies like it was her own party, and maybe it was. Maybe it always had been. I walked through the garden with a practiced smile, thanking people I didn't know well, making small talk, pretending to enjoy the jazz, quartet playing under the fairy lights. But something gnawed at me. I couldn't quite name it yet, but it felt like being watched by something I couldn't see. A sense that I was the joke everyone was in on except me. Then came the moment. Gregory clinked his glass. I'd like to say a few words about the woman of the hour. The crowd quieted. My chest tightened. I braced myself, hoping, just hoping that maybe this was it. Maybe the cruelty I'd felt was in my head. Maybe he was about to remind me I mattered. He began with a story. A harmless one. About our early years, our tiny apartment in San Diego, how we used to share Chinese takeout and dream of owning our own company. There were laughs. People smiled. For a second, I smiled too. Then he said, "But Isabella isn't just a woman of strength. She's a woman of patience. God knows I've tested that more than once. She's always been there, even when she probably shouldn't have been." Laughter. Some knowing chuckles. A few exchanged glances I didn't understand. Gregory turned to me and raised his glass. "Here's to 50 years of fire, and the woman who's managed not to burn anything. Down." More laughter. I felt my smile falter, but I nodded. I raised my glass. I played along. Then Savannah stepped up. She held a plate. One single cupcake, sloppily frosted, slightly dented, placed on a fancy porcelain dish like an insult wearing pearls. "I know Mom's not big on cake," she said, into the microphone, "so we figured she wouldn't mind something simple." My heart dropped. She set it down in front of me, the candle already lit, the flame flickering like it knew it didn't belong there. I leaned in to read the writing, squinting under the dim garden lights. "Happy 50th, still hanging." In there. I didn't hear the laughter this time. I only heard blood rushing in my ears. Savannah grinned. "Mom always says age is just a number, but come on, 50 is a lot of numbers." Another wave of laughter. I looked at her. My daughter. My miracle baby. The girl I'd stayed up with through fevers. The girl I'd read bedtime stories to even when I was exhausted. The girl I loved with a kind of ferocity that scared me sometimes. And she looked back at me like I was a stranger. No affection, no remorse, just smug satisfaction. It was deliberate, calculated, a performance. I excused myself quietly, leaving the cupcake untouched. I walked into the vineyard, past rows of grapes, bathed in moonlight until I found an empty bench. I sat there, alone, and shook. It wasn't the insult. It was the confirmation. Everything I had felt in the last year, the coldness, the withdrawal, the lies, had crystallized in that moment. They didn't just stop loving me. They had started resenting me, mocking me, planning around me like I was no longer a person, but an obstacle. I stayed there for 20 minutes, maybe longer. No one came looking. When I returned, the party was winding down. Gregory was laughing with a group of colleagues, his arm slung casually around a younger woman in a red silk dress I hadn't noticed earlier. She was touching his chest in a way that made my stomach turn. I locked eyes with her. She didn't look away. Neither did Gregory. He didn't even flinch. Later that night, back in our hotel suite, I asked him, "Who was the woman in red?" He didn't look up from his phone. "Just one of the PR girls. Relax." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I didn't cry either, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I had entered a new stage of pain, one that was quieter, more dangerous. The next morning, I watched Savannah have breakfast with the same girl. They were laughing about something. When I asked who she was, Savannah said, "Oh, that's Layla. She's awesome. Works with Dad. Super smart." She said it like she admired her, like she knew her. I said nothing. But something in me clicked. That was the moment I stopped wondering if I was being betrayed. It became a question of how far the betrayal went. In the weeks that followed, I began paying attention differently. I logged Gregory's trips. I tracked Savannah's sudden influx of spending money. I noticed odd receipts. I watched as Gregory locked files on his computer. I heard whispers that died the moment I entered a room. One night, after Gregory flew out for business, I tried to open his office drawer and found it padlocked, a drawer he had never locked before. I called the law firm I used to work for, an old friend still practiced there, and asked her about legal guardianship, asset transfers, and how one might legally prepare to disempower a spouse without their knowledge. She hesitated. Then she said, Isabella, is someone doing this to you? I lied. Said it was for a character I was writing. A story. She didn't believe me. But she gave me the information anyway. That night, I didn't sleep. Sat by the window, watching the Seattle rain slide down the glass, and I whispered to myself, they're going to erase me. And for the first time in months, I smiled. Because now, I had a truth. And I would do what I do best. Prepare. No more crying. No more hoping. No more waiting to be chosen. They thought the cupcake was the joke. But the joke was thinking I'd stay. Disappearance, I learned, is an art. It isn't a vanishing act pulled in desperation. It's the carefully choreographed shedding of an old skin, a version of you no longer meant to survive. The woman I was, Isabella Moreau, the loyal wife, the sacrificing mother, had reached the edge of extinction. But I wasn't going to let them finish the job. If they wanted me gone, I'd give them exactly that, on my terms. It began with a name. Marla King. She was once CIA, now an independent cyber investigator and intelligence consultant. I found her through a women's legal survival network I stumbled across in the dark corners of the internet. I sent a vague inquiry. No names, just need-to-know basics. Her response was immediate and unnervingly precise. I don't ask why. I just ask how far you're willing to go. My answer was simple. Farther than they ever expected. Marla met me in a quiet cafe in Capitol Hill under the guise of two strangers chatting over a chai latte. She had a blunt bob, sharp green eyes, and a voice that cut through noise. I told her what I knew, about Gregory's sudden secrecy, Savannah's erratic behavior, the locked drawers, the strange woman in red. She listened without blinking. Let's not just find out what they're doing, she said. Let's find out what they're planning to do to you. Within a week, she hacked into Gregory's cloud backups and email aliases. What she found made my hands tremble. Encrypted. Folders filled with real estate transfers, forged documents, and offshore account ledgers with my forged signature. Hidden clauses in our prenuptial agreement, clauses he had added after the fact using digital overlays. Layla, the woman in red, was more than a mistress. She was the financial architect of my downfall. And Savannah, my own daughter, was aware of it all. Her tuition was being paid from one of the hidden accounts in Layla's name. But what nearly made me vomit was an email thread between Gregory and a third party, someone untraceable using burner emails. If she signs over the assets willingly, we keep it clean. If not, we make it look like an accident. She's unstable. It won't be hard to convince people. And Layla replied, insurance pays double if she's declared dead, not just missing. That was the moment I decided I would give them what they wanted. A death. But not mine. I spent 2 weeks planning every detail of my disappearance. Marla helped me forge new documents, new identity, new bank account, a medical file showing early signs of mental deterioration. I kept journals of erratic thoughts, planted phone calls to friends about feeling off, paranoid, even left a voice memo on Gregory's phone while he slept, pretending to cry about not being able to do this anymore. I made sure he heard exactly what he wanted to believe, that I was spiraling. The sailing trip was the perfect opportunity. Gregory insisted on it. A second honeymoon to fix things, he said. I knew what he was really doing, setting the stage for the final act. He'd already updated my life insurance policy and moved our joint holdings into his name under the guise of streamlining the estate. But I beat him to the punch. 2 nights before the trip, I secretly slipped away to Martha's Vineyard, where Marla had helped me secure a small hidden property under a shell company. From there, I watched as Gregory took the boat out on the planned morning, then called the Coast Guard with a panicked report. She fell overboard. I turned around and she was gone. It made national headlines. Local news picked it up first. Real estate tycoon's wife presumed drowned in boating tragedy. Gregory gave a tearful interview on live television. Savannah posted a slideshow of childhood photos and wrote, "I lost my best friend, my first home, my mother." The world mourned, but I watched it all unfold from a secure apartment in Sedona, Arizona. The desert was warm, open, and empty, the perfect place for rebirth. I rented a modest house tucked behind a canyon ridge. No internet under my name, no paper trails, just peace and planning. I cut my hair, started running again, took up pottery, something I hadn't done since college. But I wasn't just healing. I was working. Marla and I built a war room from scratch. A wall covered in red string, USB drives, flash drives, photos, emails, maps of offshore transfers. Every file, every password, every trace of Gregory's web of deception went onto that wall. We created backups in triplicate, buried hard drives in 3 different cities, set up anonymous email accounts. But more than that, I began documenting everything. My story, my truth, my voice. I recorded nightly audio logs, not just evidence but confessions, grief, anger, memories of being silenced, diminished. It wasn't just revenge. It was resurrection. Every time I hit record, I felt like I was reclaiming another piece of myself. One night, I said aloud, "They tried to erase me, but I'm becoming the most unforgettable version of myself." A few weeks later, the podcast idea was born, The Vanishing. Marla helped me set up a secure upload channel, voice only, no traceable metadata. I released the first episode anonymously, no names, no locations, just the voice of a woman who had disappeared. The response was immediate. Hundreds of women wrote to the anonymous inbox. Women who had vanished emotionally inside their own homes. Women who were betrayed by their daughters. Women who had everything taken and clawed their way back. It wasn't just a podcast anymore. It was a movement. Gregory, meanwhile, was unraveling. We monitored his financial activity. He began liquidating assets at odd hours, moving money between shell companies, prepping for a silent exit. But what he didn't know was that I had already filed a sealed affidavit with an attorney Marla trusted. A document that would automatically release to authorities if anything happened to me. Insurance, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, financial abuse. The trap was set. Savannah, though, was a different ache. I still checked her social media. Her posts moved from grief to celebration. She was seen vacationing in Tulum 2 weeks after the memorial service. She was photographed at a party wearing Layla's brand's newest clothing line. She didn't miss me. Not really. One night, I heard her voice on a live stream. She was giving advice to followers about letting go of toxicity. I stared at the screen and whispered, "You mean me?" And I realized something that broke me all over again. Savannah didn't lose me. She chose to give me up. But she would see me again. Not as the mother she betrayed, but as the woman she never saw coming. This wasn't just a comeback. This was the beginning of my storm. The storm began with silence. A deliberate, haunting silence that stretched through inboxes, across boardrooms, and into the marble halls where Gregory Moreau once walked like a king. Silence, not because there was nothing left to say, but because the words I had been preparing were finally ready to be heard, by the police, by the public, and by the man who thought I'd never rise again. We triggered the drop at 5:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. Marla's plan was elegant, clean, and brutal. 3 separate packages were delivered, one to the FBI field office in Seattle, another to a trusted investigative journalist at the Washington Post, and a third to the board of directors at Moreau Properties. Inside each package was a digital drive labeled only with 2 words, "Truth Files." What followed was a flood, encrypted folders decrypted within minutes by authorities and media outlets alike. There were high-definition photos of Layla and Gregory at private meetings, time-stamped during his so-called business trips. Voice memos of late-night conversations between Gregory and an anonymous fixer, discussing how to move my shares, without legal noise. Bank statements showing direct payments from offshore accounts to Savannah's tuition bills, each authorized under aliases traced back to Layla's LLC. The evidence was airtight. But I hadn't just collected proof of infidelity or fraud. I had collected intention. One video in particular sealed his fate. It was grainy, recorded through a lens pressed against his office window at night. Gregory was pacing, agitated, phone to ear, saying, "She's not going to sign, and if she doesn't, we'll have to move on to Plan B." Layla already spoke to the guy. She disappears, we collect. Simple. That audio was played on live television. Gregory Moreau was arrested 2 days later at a charity golf tournament. Cameras were already waiting for him. The man who once charmed entire rooms with his smooth delivery and tailored suits was led away in handcuffs, blinking in disbelief as flashbulbs burst like small explosions around his face. The media firestorm was immediate and relentless. Headlines screamed across the nation: "Wife presumed dead, returns from the shadows, with evidence of plot to kill her." Gregory Moreau charged in multi-million-dollar fraud and conspiracy case. Daughter implicated in mother's disappearance. But the most viral headline came not from a newsroom, but from my podcast feed. I released a new episode. It began with my voice, calm and firm. "This is not a story of a woman scorned. This is the story of a woman erased, and the fire she became." The world listened. More than 2 million downloads in 48 hours. My inbox flooded. Survivors, strangers, journalists, lawyers, women who had felt invisible for years wrote to say they saw themselves in my voice, that they weren't crazy, that they too would rise. But for me, the most important part was yet to come. The courtroom. Savannah appeared before the grand jury first. She was escorted in wearing a designer coat, head low, sunglasses too big for her face. She tried to play the grieving daughter, to claim she had been manipulated by Layla and didn't understand the full extent of the plans. But the prosecutor had receipts, literally. Emails she'd sent bragging about her upcoming inheritance, photos of her celebrating with Layla, and voice messages between her and her father where she laughed and said, "It'll be just us soon. I can't wait." Her lawyers negotiated a plea deal: 5 years probation, financial restitution, and full cooperation in the investigation against Gregory and Layla. But public opinion had no mercy. She was dropped from her university. Sponsorships she had been chasing evaporated. Her social media accounts were swarmed with comments, some angry, some heartbreakingly sad. How could you do that to your mother? Do you feel anything? What happened to the girl who used to post family photos every holiday? Savannah never replied, and then came the trial of Gregory Moreau. By the time the hearing opened, every seat in the gallery was filled. Journalists sat shoulder to shoulder, pens poised, ready to witness the fall of a man they once praised. Layla had disappeared, fled the country a week before Gregory's arrest. A warrant was issued. She would be found. Gregory entered in a navy suit, hair perfectly combed, hands cuffed. He scanned the room, and then he saw me. I didn't hide. I walked into that courtroom with my head held high, my spine straight, my voice ready. Whispers swept through the gallery, like wildfire. "She's alive. That's her. Isabella Moreau is here." For the first time since the night of the vineyard, Gregory's confidence cracked. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes widened. I could almost see the memories trying to piece themselves together. How I had disappeared. How everything had seemed to go perfectly according to his plan. And now here I was, alive, unbroken, unbent. The judge asked me to read my victim impact statement. I stood at the podium, looking directly at Gregory. He tried to look away. I didn't let him. I stand here today not just as a woman who was betrayed. I stand here as the product of every sacrifice, every silence. Every time I made myself smaller so you could shine, I gave you my life. And you tried to erase it. You didn't just take my money. You tried to take my existence. You manipulated our daughter. You mocked my pain. And you played God with something you didn't understand. I paused. The room was breathless. But here's what you didn't count on. You didn't count on me surviving. You didn't count on me remembering who I was before you. You didn't count on the day I would look at my reflection and see something more than a wife or a mother. I saw a warrior. Gregory's jaw clenched. His attorney scribbled something. None of it mattered. I am not here to forgive you, I finished. I am here to bury the version of me you tried to destroy, and to remind you that truth always finds its way. Applause was not allowed in court, but it came anyway. A soft swell of hands clapping despite the gavel's protests. The judge sentenced Gregory Moreau to 12 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and attempted unlawful asset transfer. Further charges related to the conspiracy to harm me were still under investigation. Savannah was not present that day, but I received a message from her, through her lawyer, a few days later. I didn't know how deep it went. I'm sorry. I was stupid. Please, Mom. Just please. I stared at the message for a long time, and then I deleted it. Forgiveness is a luxury I no longer owed anyone. That evening I returned to the wall in my home in Sedona, the wall covered in red string and old pain, and I took it all down. Every file, every document, every image of betrayal, one by one, because this chapter wasn't about what they took from me. It was about what I reclaimed, and I wasn't done yet. There's a stillness that follows the storm, not silence, not emptiness, but something richer. A clarity that fills the air when the screaming has stopped, when the fires have burned away everything that was false, and all that's left is truth. I stood in that stillness as Isabella Moreau for the last time. My story had become a headline, a podcast, a symbol for something far beyond me. But I was no longer a story waiting to be told. I was the storyteller now, and it was time to decide who I would be from here forward. Gregory was behind bars. 12 years. Federal. More charges were pending, but he was already broken long before the gavel came down. I hadn't seen him since the sentencing. I didn't need to. I'd already looked him in the eye and taken back everything he tried to erase. Savannah had disappeared. From the spotlight, her account scrubbed, her image in tatters. Last I heard, she had taken a job at a small design firm in Denver, using her middle name, trying to start again. I didn't hate her, but I didn't grieve her either. The daughter I loved was not the woman who chose betrayal over blood. I had choices now, real ones. For the first time in decades, I was no longer defined by anyone else's ambition, expectation, or legacy. I sat at my kitchen table in Sedona, staring out at the red rock cliffs that had watched over my rebirth, and I asked myself, what do I build next? The answer came in a single word: Phoenix. Not just for what I'd become, but for what I wanted to create. Phoenix Point wasn't just a rebranding of Moreau Properties, it was a complete resurrection. I filed the paperwork under my name, my only name, Isabella. I reclaimed the board seat that had once been quietly stripped from me and replaced every executive who had stayed silent when Gregory erased me. My first act as CEO wasn't a press release or a business meeting. It was a community grant. We launched the Phoenix Reclaim Project, an initiative to provide housing and legal aid for women escaping financial abuse, emotional coercion, and erasure within their own homes. We partnered with grassroots organizers, shelters, advocacy lawyers. Every new development we built would fund 2 additional homes for women who needed a second chance. People asked me why I didn't just retire. I could have taken what I'd recovered and disappeared into comfort, but I wasn't here to disappear. I was here to be seen, to shine in the open, without permission, without apology. And so I kept speaking. Universities reached out for guest lectures. TEDx offered a stage. Book deals followed. But I accepted only one of those things. The invitation to speak at a women's conference in New York, not because it was prestigious, but because the theme was voices that were silenced. I stood on that stage and told my story, not for revenge, not for fame, but for every person in the audience who had once felt invisible. I told them that being erased is not the end. Sometimes, it's the beginning of the most powerful version of yourself. Afterward, a woman approached me in tears. She'd left her husband the week before after discovering a hidden bank account in his name. She held my hand and said, "Your voice gave me mine back." And that, more than any court victory or company title, was what healed me. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. Late one evening back in Sedona, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address. It was from Savannah. I recognized the handwriting instantly. My chest tightened as I unfolded the page. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to read this. I just wanted to say that I've been doing a lot of thinking about who I became, about what I let happen. You were always there for me, and when it mattered most, I wasn't there for you. I let people tell me who you were, and I listened. I don't know how to make up for that. I just wanted you to know I'm trying, and I miss you. Love, Savannah." I read it twice. And then I folded it back up, walked outside, and lit a match. I didn't burn it in anger. I burned it in peace. Because closure isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's knowing you no longer need one. Walked back inside and picked up my journal, the one I had started when I first sensed the cracks in my life. I hadn't written in it since the trial. Now I opened it to a blank page. I wrote, "Phoenix Point is not just a place. It's a declaration of who I was, of what I survived, and of the woman no one will ever silence again." Beneath it, I wrote, the final line, "Case closed. But not my story. That was only just beginning." Isabella Moreau's journey wasn't just about betrayal. It wasn't just about revenge or even justice. It was about the rediscovery of power in the aftermath of silence. It was about identity, resilience, and the fierce reclaiming of a life nearly stolen. She began this story as a woman who had poured everything she had into her family. A brilliant legal mind who set aside her career to support her husband Gregory's ambitions to raise their daughter Savannah and to nurture a home built on the idea of loyalty and love. But what she received in return was something darker: manipulation, deceit, and a slow, systematic erasure of her place in the life she helped build. On her 50th birthday, the mask slipped. What should have been a moment of celebration became a public humiliation, a grotesque theater where her husband and daughter mocked her under the guise of a joke. But instead of breaking her, that moment sparked the first flicker of clarity. Instead of confronting them in rage or tears, Isabella stepped back and began watching. She began listening, and she began planning. With the help of a skilled investigator, she uncovered the devastating truth. Gregory and Savannah, in partnership with Gregory's mistress, were plotting not only to steal her fortune, but to eliminate her altogether, legally or otherwise. So, Isabella did what no one expected. She vanished. Faking her own death was not an escape. It was a declaration. While the world believed she was gone, she was building. From the quiet strength of Sedona, Arizona, Isabella transformed into something more than what Gregory or Savannah had ever imagined. She gathered evidence, reclaimed her identity, and released her voice into the world through a powerful podcast that became a lifeline for thousands of women who had felt invisible in their own homes. Her return shocked the nation. Gregory was arrested. Savannah faced public disgrace and legal consequences. But more importantly, the world saw the power of a woman who refused to stay silent. Isabella stood in court, not with vengeance, but with clarity. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't need forgiveness. What she needed was truth, and she delivered it. In the end, she reclaimed her company, renamed it Phoenix Point, and transformed it into a mission-driven enterprise to support other women rising from the ashes of abuse, manipulation, and abandonment. She became not just a survivor, but a symbol of what is possible when you choose to rise instead of retreat. And what about Savannah? A letter arrived, a message of regret, maybe even love. Isabella read it, then let it go. Because sometimes, healing doesn't come from reconciliation. It comes from the power to walk away without bitterness. Her story ends not with a dramatic reunion or a tearful apology, but with a quiet moment of triumph. A woman at peace, a warrior reborn. The lesson we take away, the heart of Isabella's. Story isn't about revenge. It's about remembering that no matter how far we fall, emotionally, financially, spiritually, we always have the power to rise. Betrayal may break your heart, but it doesn't have to break your soul. In a world where many suffer in silence, this story reminds us, you don't have to stay quiet to keep the peace. You don't have to shrink yourself to be loved. And you never, ever have to apologize for surviving. So how do we apply this lesson? By paying attention to the voices we've silenced inside ourselves. By choosing boundaries over sacrifice. By daring to ask, what would happen if I stopped accepting less than I deserve? Whether you've experienced betrayal, emotional abandonment, or the slow erosion of your identity, know this. Your story isn't over. Your strength is waiting, and maybe, just maybe, it begins today. Now it's your turn to reflect. If you were in Isabella's shoes and discovered that the people closest to you were plotting behind your back, what would you do? A. Try to forgive and rebuild from within. B. Walk away, rebuild yourself, and return stronger. Comment below with A or B, and tell us why. Let's hear what you would do. Also, what's your takeaway from Isabella's story? Do you believe in second chances, or do you believe some betrayals are final? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might just inspire someone else. And if this story moved you, even a little, hit subscribe to support the channel. Your support helps us keep telling real, raw, and powerful stories that deserve to be heard. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay strong, stay smart, and never disappear.